The Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte has been welcoming leaders to the capital city as he prepares to host the Association of Southeast Asian Nations Summit for the first time. There have been protests, though, ahead of the talks. Hundreds of demonstrators marching towards the U.S. Embassy in Manila were stopped by riot police. They were saying they want non-ASEAN countries to stop interfering in Philippines' foreign policy. They also want ministers to discuss the contentious issue of the South China Sea. Well, let's get more on this story. Joining us live from Istanbul is Richard Javad Heydarian, who was a policy advisor at the Philippine House of Representatives between 2009 and 2015. Thank you for joining us here on Impact. First, the South China Sea. Remind us why this is going to be such a big issue.
Well, the South China Sea was supposed to become a central issue because of rising concerns over China's reclamation activities and the potential establishment of an exclusion zone as China builds a sprawling network of airstrips and military facilities in the area, not to mention rising tensions between the United States and China in the area. So everyone was expecting that the Association of Southeast Asian Nations will push forward with a strong statement calling upon China and other claimant countries to exercise self-restraint and to finalize a code of conduct so that countries will deal with their disputes in a peaceful manner and based on dialogue. The problem was President Duterte, who's now in the middle of a rapprochement with China, very vociferously pushed back against any strong statement against China. In fact, many diplomats across the region were frustrated. No less than the Indonesian President Joko Widodo said that ASEAN has to have a stronger position on the South China Sea issue. They have to have a coherent position among themselves and convince China to also respect the rule of law. But President Duterte not only refused to raise the Philippines' landmark arbitration case against China last year, but he also refused to allow ASEAN to even mention the impact, the destabilizing impact of China's militarization of the disputes by building artificial islands in the middle of the high seas and big airstrips and military facilities. So that was a big slam dunk diplomatic victory for China without a question. But Duterte, in fact, used the ASEAN summit for his own personal purposes, essentially to create a platform to legitimize his controversial war on drugs and also push for more cooperation on the issue of terrorism when there's consensus. And he was also successful in doing that because most of ASEAN countries are autocratic countries anyway who are very supportive of it.
Richard, will he expect criticism from other leaders at ASEAN over the war on drugs and the number of deaths that there have been?
So far as the ASEAN diplomats and governments are concerned, behind the scenes, some countries are raising a lot of concerns. But on the record, a lot of them are very careful because ASEAN is based on consensus-based decision-making, and ASEAN is based on the principle of mutual non-interference and respect for sovereignty. So as much as the ASEAN countries call upon US and China and other major powers not to interfere in their affairs, they're also expected not to interfere in the affairs of fellow ASEAN countries. That is why formally you're not going to expect any criticism. If anything, we're seeing a Duterte wave whereby other ASEAN countries, autocratic countries in the region, and even Indonesia also taking a tougher position on criminality, on issue of like drugs. So it seems Duterte is actually gaining traction in the region, and his brand of strongman populism is now the new normal. If anything, perhaps Duterte now is the new face of ASEAN, whether we like it or not.
Richard Javad Heydarian, thank you very much for joining us from Istanbul. And there's more on all our stories, including what's happening with the ASEAN Summit on the BBC's website at bbc.com/news. You can also reach me and the rest of the team on Twitter, where I'm at Philippa BBC. Lots more still to come.